The air in Northamptonshire remains still, heavy with the weight of 5 centuries of history, but the digital world is currently engulfed in a firestorm that no public relations team can extinguish. It is the 28th of April, 2026, and we have just witnessed what historians will likely call the final stand for the soul of a legacy. For years, a fragile peace existed, a tense silence maintained between the hallowed halls of Althorp House and the sun-drenched mansions of Montecito. But today, that silence was not just broken. It was shattered by a digital thunderclap that has left Meghan Markle in a state of absolute panic and the Sussex media empire teetering on the edge of a total collapse. The source of this seismic shift is none other than Charles, the 9th Earl Spencer. Standing in the portrait-lined corridors of his ancestral seat, the man who once promised the entire world at Westminster Abbey in 1997 that he would protect his sister's sons from the very forces that hunted her, has finally drawn a line in the sand. This was not a leaked snippet or a whispered rumor from an anonymous courtier. This was a direct, ice-cold execution of authority. The Earl took to his official platforms to deliver a message that has reverberated across every continent, aimed directly at the heart of the latest multi-million-dollar Netflix project, centered around the late Diana, Princess of Wales. For months, whispers had been circulating about a monumental production timed for the 30-year anniversary of Diana's passing in 2027. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Sussexes' dwindling media portfolio, a definitive, multi-part epic that would bridge the gap between the tragic past of the mother and the controversial present of the daughter-in-law. But Charles Spencer has just pulled the plug in the most public way imaginable. He revealed that when Netflix approached him for his blessing and access to the Spencer family archives, he found a name on the list of key participants that stopped him cold: Meghan Markle. His response was a sentence that will haunt the Sussex brand for decades. Is this some kind of joke? With those 7 words, the Earl did more than just decline a business proposal. He dismissed the entire narrative of Meghan being the spiritual successor to Diana as a farce, an absurdity, and a calculated exploitation of a sacred family history. He spoke of his beloved sister with a protective ferocity that has not been seen since that day in 1997, making it crystal clear that the doors to the genuine Spencer story are now slammed shut and bolted from the inside. This is the nightmare scenario that Harry and Meghan have spent years trying to avoid. Their entire American identity, their very relevance in the cutthroat world of global entertainment, has been built upon the foundation of their connection to Diana's aura. They have carefully curated a story of 2 women, separated by time but united by the same struggles against an unfeeling monarchy and a predatory press. But now, the primary gatekeeper of that history, the man who shares Diana's own blood, has officially labeled this connection as unscrupulous exploitation. In Montecito, the fallout is reportedly catastrophic. Industry insiders suggest that the Netflix deal, once valued at over $100 million, is now in a state of terminal freefall. Without the cooperation of the Spencer family, without access to Althorp, and without the blessing of the man who guards Diana's final resting place on that quiet island, the documentary loses its soul. It becomes just another piece of unauthorized content, stripped of the authenticity that the streaming giant so desperately craves. But the damage goes far deeper than a mere balance sheet. This is a brand-killing event because it attacks the one thing Meghan Markle has fought to establish since the day of her royal wedding: her legitimacy. By claiming she clings relentlessly to a legacy that does not belong to her, Charles Spencer has given the world permission to look at the Diana cosplay through a much harsher lens. Every piece of jewelry worn, every pose struck in a field of sunflowers, and every tear shed in front of a camera is now being reevaluated, not as a tribute, but as a calculated move in a high-stakes commercial gambit. As we stand here in April 2026, the question of who actually owns the memory of the people's princess is being answered. It is not the highest bidder, and it is not the person who shouts the loudest on a streaming platform. It is the family who loved her before she was a global icon, and they have decided that enough is enough. The Great Sussex rebrand has hit a wall made of 500 years of Spencer pride, and for the first time, Meghan Markle is finding that there are some gates that even a royal title and a Netflix contract cannot open. The war for Diana's legacy has begun, and the first shot has been fired from the very place where she sleeps. Stay with us as we dive deeper into the secret documents and the desperate, frantic calls that followed this announcement, because this is only the beginning of the end. To understand why Charles Spencer's rejection has caused such a seismic shock in 2026, one must first understand the man himself and the immense weight of the name he carries. In the modern world of flashbulbs and 15-minute fame, Charles, the ninth Earl Spencer, stands as a remnant of a different era, a man whose authority is not derived from social media followers or streaming metrics, but from 5 centuries of ancestral grit. He is not merely a member of the aristocracy. He is the sovereign protector of a legacy that belongs to the people, yet is guarded by his blood. For nearly 30 years, the Earl has occupied a unique and often lonely position. While the royal family at Buckingham Palace managed the official, sanitized version of the Princess of Wales, it was Charles Spencer who reclaimed her soul for Althorp. When he made the decision to bury his sister on a secluded island in the center of an oval lake on his estate, he was making a profound statement. He was bringing Diana home, away from the cold marble of royal vaults and back to the Spencer earth. This act established him as the high priest of her memory, the one man who could decide who gets to walk the path to her shrine and who is kept at the gate. This historical context is vital because it exposes the fundamental miscalculation made by the Sussexes. In their world of California branding, everything is negotiable, and every story is a commodity to be traded for engagement. But the Earl does not view Diana as a content pillar or a marketing asset. To him, she is the sister he watched grow up within these very walls, the woman whose vulnerability was hunted to the point of extinction. His intervention in 2026 is not an act of sudden malice. It is the culmination of decades of silent observation. He has watched from his ancestral seat as his sister's name was used to sell everything from unauthorized biographies to tell-all documentaries, and he has finally decided that the line has been crossed. The gravitas of Charles Spencer was forged in the fire of 1997. Every royal observer remembers his eulogy at Westminster Abbey, a speech so sharp and so defiant that it sent shivers through the spines of the establishment. He stood before the world and promised that Diana's blood family would ensure her sons were not just molded by the monarchy, but encouraged to let their souls sing. For 29 years, he has carried the burden of that promise. However, as the 2020s progressed, a new threat emerged not from the press or the palace, but from within the family itself. Psychologically, Charles Spencer operates with surgical precision. Unlike the chaotic outbursts often seen in modern celebrity feuds, the Earl's public statements are rare, making them devastatingly effective. He understands that his silence is his greatest weapon, and when he breaks it, the world listens. By naming Meghan Markle specifically, he has signaled a transgression so significant that his long-held quiet became unsustainable. He sees in the current Sussex narrative a haunting repetition of the celebrity culture Diana tried to escape, a world where grief is repackaged as marketable content and shared with the highest bidder. There is also the matter of the Spencer pedigree. In the rigid hierarchy of British society, the Spencers are an independent dynasty whose lineage is arguably more English than the House of Windsor. This gives Charles a level of social untouchability that Harry and Meghan no longer possess. While the Sussexes have traded their royal protection for a life of commercial ventures, the Earl remains firmly rooted in the soil of Althorp. He does not need a Netflix deal to maintain his lifestyle. He does not need a podcast to remain relevant. This independence makes him the most dangerous opponent the Sussexes have ever faced. He cannot be bought, and he cannot be cancelled. Within the walls of Althorp House, surrounded by 500 years of Spencer ghosts, the Earl has spent the last several years curated a private archive that remains the holy grail for historians and filmmakers. This is the leverage that Netflix so desperately wanted. They didn't just want his interview, they wanted his keys. They wanted to film in the rooms where Diana played as a child, and to use personal letters that have never seen the light of day. They believed that by having Prince Harry involved, the Earl would naturally open the doors. But Charles Spencer saw through the corporate veneer. He recognized that the proposed series was not a tribute to a sister, but a vehicle for a niece-in-law to solidify her own brand. By saying no, he hasn't just blocked a film crew. He has effectively declared that Meghan Markle is not part of the Spencer story. He has reclaimed the narrative from the clutches of Hollywood and returned it to the quiet dignity of his estate. As we move into the specifics of the failed Netflix deal in the next section, remember this. In the battle for Diana's soul, the man who guards her grave has proven to be a far more powerful player than the ones who only carry her name on their stationery. The Guardian has spoken, and his word is law at Althorp. To understand the sheer scale of the panic currently radiating from the Sussex camp in April 2026, one must look at the balance sheets and the creative dry well that their media empire has become. This was never just about a documentary. It was about survival. The rumored $100 million deal with Netflix, which had once seemed like an inexhaustible fountain of wealth and influence, was nearing its expiration. Following a string of projects that critics labeled as lackluster, including a polo series that failed to gallop and a lifestyle brand that struggled to find its footing, Harry and Meghan needed a Hail Mary. They needed the ultimate blockbuster to justify their existence in the Hollywood pantheon. That project was supposed to be the 30-year anniversary epic, scheduled for release in 2027. The strategy was as transparent as it was audacious. By positioning the production to coincide with the 3-decade mark of Diana's passing, the Sussexes were not just looking for viewership, they were looking for a global reset of their public image. According to industry insiders who have seen the early drafts of the proposal, this was not intended to be a standard historical retrospective. Instead, it was a carefully engineered narrative designed to establish an unmistakable, almost haunting connection between the challenges faced by the Princess of Wales in the late 20th century and the struggles of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, in the present day. The screenplay, crafted by high-level consultants, reportedly aimed to cast Meghan not merely as a family member paying tribute, but as the spiritual successor to Diana's legacy. She was to be the torchbearer, the only woman capable of truly understanding the isolation, the mental health battles, and the relentless hounding of a hostile press. To make this connection stick, the production team planned to draw direct parallels between Diana's most traumatic moments and Meghan's own history, specifically highlighting the 2023 near-catastrophic car chase in New York. Despite the fact that law enforcement and photography agencies had extensively questioned the severity of that incident, the Netflix project intended to frame it as history repeating itself. For the executives at Netflix, the reasoning was purely commercial. In the brutal landscape of streaming wars, drama and controversy are the only currencies that matter. The combination of the globally adored, tragic figure of Diana with the polarizing, attention-grabbing figure of Meghan resulted in a potent cocktail of nostalgia and contemporary conflict. It was a strategy that almost certainly guaranteed to dominate the cultural discourse and drive subscriptions through the roof. But there was one critical, insurmountable obstacle that both the streaming giant and the Sussexes underestimated: the man who holds the keys to the vault. When Netflix approached Charles Spencer, they weren't just looking for a talking head interview. They were looking for total access. They wanted to bring their cameras into the private apartments of Althorp, to fly drones over the sacred island where Diana rests, and to film the confidential family archives, letters, childhood diaries, and home movies that have never been seen by the public. Involvement from the Earl would have provided the ultimate seal of approval, a veneer of authenticity that Harry and Meghan, for all their royal titles, could not provide on their own. Without Charles Spencer, the project is just another unauthorized biography. With him, it would have been a historical event. However, the moment the Earl saw the list of participants and realized that Meghan was being positioned as the central narrator and heir to his sister's soul, he didn't just decline, he detonated the project. He saw what he later described in private as unscrupulous exploitation. He saw his sister's memory being used as a life raft to rescue the fading media careers of a couple who had spent the last several years airing family grievances for profit. In his eyes, the Diana card was not a commodity to be traded in a 9-figure deal. It was a sacred memory that deserved dignity, not a marketing tie-in for a lifestyle brand. The fallout of this rejection is terminal for the project. Without the Spencer archives and without the blessing of the family, Netflix is now facing a catastrophic dilemma. To move forward would be to openly insult the very family they are supposed to be honoring, a move that would almost certainly alienate the millions of Diana's fans who view Charles Spencer as the ultimate authority on her life. Reports are surfacing that the production has been indefinitely paused, a Hollywood euphemism for a project that is dead in the water. This is the kingdom of ashes that Harry and Meghan now survey in 2026. By attempting to bridge the gap between Diana and Meghan, they have instead created a chasm that has swallowed their most valuable asset. The Diana card, their final and most potent move, has been played and subsequently trumped by the Earl's public veto. As the realization sets in that they have lost the support of the one man who could have validated their narrative, the Sussexes are left to contemplate a future without the legitimizing ghost of the Princess of Wales. The commercial gamble has backfired spectacularly, and the bridge to Althorp has been burned to the ground, leaving their media empire stranded on an island of its own making. The term Diana cosplay did not emerge from a vacuum. It is a phrase that has haunted the halls of social media and royal commentary for years, but in 2026, it has taken on a far more sinister and definitive meaning. To the casual observer, Meghan Markle's wardrobe choices might have seemed like a series of touching tributes, a way for a daughter-in-law to honor a woman she never met. But to Charles Spencer, and to those who spent their lives in the actual presence of the Princess of Wales, these choices looked less like admiration and more like a premeditated effort to absorb an aura. It was a strategic alignment, a method of wrapping oneself in the iconography of a martyr in order to deflect criticism and cultivate a global identity as a persecuted saint. The campaign, as many critics now point out, began almost immediately. On the night of her wedding reception, Meghan wore Diana's magnificent emerald-cut aquamarine ring, a stunning piece that served as a loud, clear signal of her new position within the family. But as time marched on, the tributes became a procession. We saw the butterfly earrings during the tour of Australia. We saw the gold Cartier tank watch, a piece that Diana wore constantly in her later years, appearing on Meghan's wrist during high-profile interviews and magazine shoots. Each appearance was documented with surgical precision by the Sussex PR machine, ensuring that the media made the unmistakable connection. This was not just fashion, it was sartorial appropriation. By 2021, the strategy shifted from jewelry to the narrative itself. The bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey was widely seen as a modern-day recreation of Diana's 1995 Panorama interview. The lighting, the heavy eyeliner, the posture, and most importantly the script were all hauntingly familiar. Meghan spoke of being silenced, of her mental health struggles being ignored by a cold and unfeeling institution, and of her sense of total isolation. She was framing herself as the outsider who had been let down by the same machinery that had failed Diana decades earlier. Harry solidified this connection in their 6-part Netflix series, directly comparing the media harassment of his wife to the emotional harassment that led to his mother's death. However, the psychological analysis of this behavior reveals a dangerous flaw. For a woman like Meghan, who had to construct a public persona from the ground up while under the most intense scrutiny imaginable, the Diana brand offered an attractive shortcut. It provided a ready-made story of misplaced goodwill and righteous disobedience. If she could convince the world she was Diana's spiritual heir, she would gain a level of popular sympathy and legitimacy that would be otherwise impossible to achieve as a newcomer. But in doing so, she made her entire identity dependent on a legacy that she did not own and crucially over which she had no control. The breaking point for Charles Spencer reportedly came during the fallout of the 2023 car chase in New York, when the Sussexes spokesperson described a near-catastrophic pursuit by paparazzi that echoed the tragic events in Paris. The world held its breath. But when law enforcement and local officials questioned the severity of the claims, the comparison turned sour. To the Earl, this was the ultimate transgression. It was no longer a tribute. It was an attempt to weaponize his sister's death to gain a tactical advantage in a media feud. It was a performance of grief that utilized his family's most private trauma as a marketing tool. By the time we reached the 2026 Netflix proposal, the Diana cosplay had become the foundation of the Sussex business model. But Charles Spencer's public rejection has effectively stripped that foundation away. He has ruled that while Harry is Diana's son, Meghan is not her successor. Through his ice-cold refusal to participate, he has signaled that the Spencer family will no longer tolerate the commercialization of a ghost. He has exposed the narrative for what it is, a fiction built on borrowed credibility. This leaves Meghan in a devastating psychological position. If she is not the new Diana, then who is she in the eyes of the global public? Once the halo of the People's Princess is removed, what remains is a starker, more brutal depiction of ambition. Spencer's intervention has forced a final reckoning. He has regained the narrative, taking his sister's memory away from the realm of celebrity branding and bringing it back to the quiet, dignified halls of Althorp. The ghost in the machine has been exorcised, and for the first time, the Duchess of Sussex must stand on her own, without the protection of a legacy that was never hers to claim. The Diana card has not just been played, it has been torn up in front of the entire world. The silence currently radiating from the Sussexes' mansion in Montecito is not the quiet of peace. It is the hollow, ringing silence that follows a total structural collapse. In this late April of 2026, the fallout from Charles Spencer's public condemnation has proven to be a brand-killing event of such magnitude that it threatens to bring their entire American media empire crashing down. For years, the Duke and Duchess have operated under the assumption that their connection to the Princess of Wales was an untouchable asset, a golden shield that protected them from the consequences of their choices. But with a few choice words from Althorp, that shield has not just been cracked, it has been vaporized. To understand the severity of the situation, one must look at the cold, hard numbers of the entertainment industry. The proposed documentary about Diana was not merely another project in a long line of content. It was the tentpole that held up the entire tent. Brand strategists are now unified in their assessment. By publicly labeling the endeavor as unscrupulous exploitation, the Earl has poisoned the well. Netflix, a corporation driven by data and subscriber sentiment, is reportedly in a state of internal panic. The streaming giant had already poured tens of millions of dollars into the Sussex partnership, only to see a string of failures, from a lackluster polo series to a lifestyle brand that struggled to gain traction in a crowded market. The Diana series was the one sure thing that could justify their nine-figure arrangement. Without the cooperation of the Spencer family, the project is dead in the water. Industry insiders suggest that Netflix executives are now hurriedly reevaluating their relationship with Harry and Meghan. To move forward with a Diana-centric project against the explicit wishes of her brother would be a public relations nightmare, alienating the millions of people who view the Earl as the legitimate guardian of his sister's memory. The commercial value of the Sussexes was always rooted in their authentic royal connection. Now that the very man who represents Diana's blood has accused them of being opportunistic grifters, that authenticity has vanished. They are no longer royal insiders. They are royal outcasts who have been publicly shamed by their own family. The financial repercussions are likely to be terminal. If Netflix chooses to terminate or significantly renegotiate their contract, citing a failure to deliver viable content, it will send a signal to the rest of Hollywood that the Sussex brand is no longer bankable. We are seeing the beginning of a slide into the middle-level influencer category, a fate that Harry and Meghan have fought desperately to avoid. They run the risk of becoming just another pair of celebrities trying to sell jam and lifestyle tips in an ocean of influencers who do it better and with far less baggage. But beyond the boardrooms and the balance sheets, the personal toll on Prince Harry is where the tragedy truly lies. He now finds himself in a precarious and heartbreaking situation, caught between the ambitions of his wife and the fierce displeasure of his mother's family. For Harry, the Spencers were more than just relatives. They were his last remaining link to the life his mother led before she became a Windsor. The Earl was the man who walked behind Diana's coffin with him, the man who vowed to protect him. To have that same man publicly reprimand him for exploiting his mother's memory is a wound deeper than any tabloid headline could ever inflict. This isolation is further compounded by the quiet, miserable vindication felt by Prince William. Reports from London suggest that the Prince of Wales has been fuming for years about what he considers to be the crass commercialization of their mother's legacy. He has watched in silence as his brother used private family trauma to fuel a streaming deal. Now, for the first time, William's fiercely protective stance has been echoed by the Spencer family. The chasm between the two brothers, already vast, has become an unbridgeable canyon. The Earl's public veto has effectively aligned the Spencers with the Windsors in a rare moment of unified defense against the Sussex narrative. As the Kingdom of Ashes begins to settle, the reality of their situation is becoming clear. Harry and Meghan have spent years building a narrative edifice on the foundations of another woman's life and suffering. They believe that because they carried the name, they own the story. But Charles Spencer has reminded the world that some things cannot be bought, and some legacies cannot be optioned for a streaming service. The Diana card was their final move, their most potent weapon in the war for public sympathy. Now that it has been taken off the table, they are left with nothing but their own dwindling relevance. The great American experiment of the Sussexes is facing its final reckoning, and as we move into the conclusion of this saga, the question is no longer how they will succeed, but how they will survive the silence that follows the storm. As we reach the final hours of this unfolding drama in April 2026, it is clear that we are witnessing more than just a family feud or a failed business deal. We are witnessing the end of a modern myth. For years, a carefully constructed narrative was sold to the global public, a story in which Meghan Markle was the reincarnation of Diana's spirit, a woman destined to finish the work that the Princess of Wales had started. It was an enthralling tale, one that served as the very foundation of the Sussex identity from the moment they stepped back as working royals. But today, that narrative lies in ruins, shattered by the one man whose authority on the subject is absolute and unquestionable. The intervention of Charles, the 9th Earl Spencer, has served as a final reckoning for the Sussex media machine. By choosing to speak out now, just 1 year before the 30-year anniversary of his sister's death, the Earl has performed a cultural exorcism. He has removed the halo of Diana from the Sussex brand and returned it to the quiet, dignified earth of Althorp. In doing so, he has exposed a fundamental truth that many had suspected, but few dared to voice with such ferocity. You cannot borrow a soul to build a business. This entire saga has been a masterclass in the difference between celebrity and legacy. Celebrity is what Harry and Meghan have cultivated in California, a fleeting, fragile thing built on press releases, streaming numbers, and high-profile associations. Legacy, however, is what resides at Althorp House. It is a weight of 500 years of history, a deep-rooted commitment to the truth of a family's bloodline. When these two forces collided, the result was inevitable. The ancient commitments of the Spencer family proved to be far more powerful than the contemporary ambitions of a media empire. The tragedy of this moment is perhaps most acute for Prince Harry. He is now a man adrift, severed from the maternal heritage that he so desperately tried to protect and honor. By allowing his wife's image to be so closely intertwined with his mother's trauma for commercial gain, he has alienated the very people who were meant to be his sanctuary. His uncle, who stood as his protector during that long walk behind the coffin in 1997, has been forced to become his public judge in 2026. It is a heartbreaking conclusion for a son who simply wanted to keep his mother's memory alive, but who lost sight of the boundary between remembrance and exploitation. For Meghan, the path forward is even more treacherous. The Diana cosplay, the strategic alignment with the jewelry, the poses, and the outsider narrative has been stripped of its power. Without the legitimizing ghost of the Princess of Wales to shield her, she must now face the public as an individual, judged on her own merits and her own actions. The unscrupulous exploitation labeled by Charles Spencer is a stain that no public relations firm can wash away. It challenges the core of her authenticity and leaves her vulnerable to the accusation that her entire royal identity was a premeditated performance. As the Netflix project is consigned to the scrap heap of Hollywood history, the industry is already shifting its gaze. The Sussexes have learned a brutal lesson. The Diana card was a one-time, only move. Now that it has been trumped by the Earl, they have no more high-stakes cards to play. They are left in the kingdom of ashes, a media empire built on a foundation that has turned to dust. Their value proposition to the world, their perceived link to the heart of the British royal story, has been severed at the source. However, in the midst of this collapse, there is a sense of profound justice for the memory of Diana herself. For nearly 3 decades, her name has been used as a weapon, a commodity, and a shield. She has been hunted, as her brother once said, even in death. But through his ice-cold precision, Charles Spencer has finally called off the hounds. He has declared that his sister's life is not a script to be reused, her suffering is not a marketing arc to be optioned, and her image is not a costume to be worn by those seeking relevance. Diana, Princess of Wales, has finally been allowed to return to being Diana Spencer. She is no longer a tool for a multi-million-dollar media deal. She is a sister, a daughter, and a woman whose true story is guarded by those who loved her before the world knew her name. The People's Princess remains a figure of global adoration, but she is no longer a Netflix princess. As we close this chapter on the 28th of April, 2026, the message from Althorp is clear. The guardian of the light has spoken, and the darkness of exploitation has been pushed back. The Sussexes may continue to pursue their ventures, but they will do so without the silent, powerful presence they so relentlessly clung to. The war for Diana's soul is over, and the winner is the truth. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most significant shifts in the history of the modern monarchy. This has been a story of ambition, blood, and the enduring power of a family's love. As the dust settles on the Sussex media empire, we are reminded that some legacies are sacred, and some doors, once closed by the hand of history, can never be reopened. We will continue to monitor the fallout from this historic announcement, but for now, the final word belongs to the Earl. Please share your thoughts on this monumental shift in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.